we got into Jesus' betrayal. They were in the Garden of Gethsemane, and they sent all those troops in. A quarter of a legion, and about 600 men. And Jesus wasn't afraid. When they asked, he asked them, "Who were you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth," and he says, "I am he." And they fell backwards when he said that. And then he asked again, "Who are you looking for?" And Jesus said, I told you I am he. I'm the one you're looking for. Let my disciples go. And so he allowed himself to be arrested without incident, other than Peter chopping somebody's ear off, and Jesus healed the guy. And then he went before the high priest, and we found out that he went to Ananias first, who was actually the one in charge behind the scenes. He was the one that was kind of the one that was leading everything, and he had his sons and son-in-law being appointed as the high priest, but he was actually the one controlling everything in behind the scenes here. And we went through his trial where they were, took him to Caiaphas, and they were trying to find these false witnesses and everything. And that's where we kind of ended. And I told you that when we started today that we're going to get into, there were some things wrong with the trial. And there were actually, 8 things wrong with the trial. See, he was being put on trial in the Sanhedrin, which is their official court, of all the chief priests and everything. And they're bringing charges and witnesses against him. Well, there were at least eight illegalities with Jesus' trial. One of them, during a trial, especially a capital offense trial, and that's what they're wanting. They're wanting to put him to death. Members of the Sanhedrin are allowed to speak in defense of a person, but they are not allowed to speak against in the capital trial. They bring the charges, and then you have to defend it. And you could speak on his behalf, but members of the Sanhedrin couldn't speak out against him.
Prosecute.
Yeah, and so that was one illegality, because the high priest spoke out against Jesus, and said he's spoken blasphemy and things like that. So that was the first offense. The second one, in order for the verdict to be valid, they typically convened in a place called the Hall of Hewn. And that was hewn stones. That was located on the northern wall of the temple court, but this was happening at the high priest's house. So there was another thing against the trial in itself. And then the third thing is the trial could not be held at night, but yet Jesus' trial was held at night. And so there was another illegality here. And the fourth thing is a trial could not be held during a great feast day, and this was held during Passover. So there was another thing that was against them. And then the witnesses, and the fifth thing is the witnesses all are supposed to be examined separately. And when they couldn't find any witnesses to collaborate with each other, they brought 2 false witnesses in together, and so they didn't, question these witnesses separate. They had them in there together. So there was another, that was something that was against them. And then when it come time to vote on the verdict, the Sanhedrin was supposed to give their verdict separately, and it's supposed to be, but yet they sentenced him to death together in open court and not cast their ballots separately. And when they did cast their ballots, they were supposed to go youngest to oldest, so the youngest one could not be influenced by the votes of the older ones. They cast, but yet the high priest spoke first and said he's guilty of blasphemy before anybody else even had a chance to vote. So, if the high priest says it, then, everybody's going to follow along when it should have went the other way around. And if the sentence was death, they're supposed to wait one night after that to carry out the sentence. But Jesus was on the cross within a few hours. So these are 8 things that were wrong with this trial. And so it spoke to kind of how corrupt this whole ordeal was. Because, they went against tradition and law and their own laws and things like that just to have this trial when they had it. And another thing that they did, they had Jesus in there, and then, one struck him and said, prophesy who hit you. Well, in John, you may think, well, that doesn't make any sense because, Jesus could see who's hitting him. But if you read some of the other Gospels, it kind of pieces together, what happened. So if you look at Luke chapter 22, verse 63 and 64, he gives an account of what happened here, when they struck Jesus. And he said, now the men who held Jesus began mocking him and beating him, and having blindfolded him, they struck him in the face and asked him, saying, prophesy, who is it who struck you? So John doesn't say that they blindfolded him, but in one of the other Gospels, it says he was blindfolded. So now it makes more sense when they said, prophesy who struck you, because he couldn't see. So basically, if you are the Messiah, prophesy, And so, that's something there. And they did try to clean up some attempts at these 80, illegalities. They did try to clean some of that up. In Luke chapter 22 again, verse 66, it says, as soon as it was day, the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the scribes, came together and led him into their councils, saying, if you are the Christ, tell us. So they brought him out of the house at daybreak after they've already said he was guilty, and then brought him into the council to try to make it official. It was already decided, so it really, didn't mean anything, but they tried to make it official. And they wanted to have it at night because they didn't want the people to know. That's what it boiled down to. They didn't want the people to know what was going on, because he had a huge following. People believed it in him, and they didn't want to have to deal with that. And then continuing on in Luke, but he said to them, if I tell you, you will by no means believe. So he says, they're asking him, are you the Christ? He said, well, if I tell you, you're not going to believe me anyway. Or you're, and then he says, and if I ask you, you will by no means answer me or let me go. So he just telling them, he said, but hereafter the Son of Man will sit on the right hand of the power of God. Then they all said, are you the Son of God? And he said to them, you rightly say that I am. And they said, what further testimony do we need? For we have heard it ourselves from his own mouth. So, they try to clean up the second and third, illegality here. They went to the Hall of Hewn Stone. That's where the council was at daybreak. And then they did it, that day to try to make it during the day instead of at night. But they've already decided, so it doesn't really matter what they were doing, but they were trying to clean some of that up because they knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew it. So did Jesus help them or hinder their efforts to put him to death? What do you think?
Well, I think he could have prophesied who hit him, number one, if he wanted to.
Yeah,
He was
if he
Jesus.
wanted to.
So it sounds like he helped them maybe.
Yeah, and he did. He helped them.
He helped.
Because, every time they get to a point where they couldn't go further, he would always speak up saying, he's the Messiah, he's the Son of God, to further this along, Every time they got in trouble, he bailed them out by something that he said, and he did it on purpose, because his purpose was to go to the cross. So everything he did, was moving that along, and when they couldn't come up with something, you know, he would speak the truth, but he would move it along. You know, because they had trouble getting false testimonies to match. You know, they brought people in at this night trial, and there were inconsistencies and there were contradictions everywhere. And but you know, Jesus, you know, he told them, says, you know, in Matthew, you know, I read the Luke account. In the Matthew account, it says, "I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy," because he put himself equal with God. So, you know, he's moving this along. And so, you know, it made it easy for them to bring about the accusation of blasphemy, because Jesus was declaring his deity, saying, "I'm going to be right there with God, sitting next to him." And because being the chief priests, and they knew the Old Testament, so they knew that when he said that it was referencing prophecies of the Old Testament that was for the Messiah. One is where he says, "I'm coming on the clouds of heaven," was a reference to Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. That says, "I was watching in night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one which shall not be destroyed." So, you know, he's coming in the clouds of glory. They would have recognized that was a messianic prophecy. And then another thing that he said is sitting at the right hand of power was a reference to Psalms 10:1, where, you know, David was writing this, and it says, "And the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies my footstool." So, you know, he's going to be at the right hand of God, and Psalm says, "Sit at my right hand." So they knew that that this was messianic prophecies that Jesus was attributing to himself. You know, when they brought him at daybreak to the temple, he repeated himself that, you know, he was going to be sitting there and all that. So he's helping them along. You know, he answered to him, "I am," when they asked him, "Are you the Son of God?" or, you know, things like that. So, you know, he's controlling the whole situation. They think they're in control, but Jesus is the one that's actually in control the whole time. And, you know, why was the reason for Jesus' death sentence so important? Because he not only had to die, but he had to die for the right reason. You know, if he was charged or crucified for having been accused of robbery, well, that wouldn't mean anything. He had to be crucified for blasphemy, because, you know, saying that he's the Son of God, telling the truth, that's the reason why. And the reason why he came was because to do God's will. You know, he was born into this world to obey God. You know, he was the Son of God, and to die for us. That was the reason why he came. And so he had to die for that reason, and that reason alone. And so he's moving it along to make sure that blasphemy, you know, is the reason why they're charging him, and not some cooped up robbery charge or whatever. Okay, so it's important that he died for the reason that he came. You know, out of all those testimonies, they couldn't find anybody to convict him, so Jesus' own words is what convicted him. So once again, Jesus directed his own arrest. You know, he come out and said, "I am he, arrest me." And he also chose the reason for his crucifixion. You're going to do it for this reason, and not some cooped up charge. So he's in complete control. All right, now we're going to start back, pick up in verse 28 of John. That's where we ended in 27, and I just had to finish that up. So in verse 28 it says, "Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning." So if you look back at that map that I sent last week, the praetorium would have been in just to the left, northwest, which would be on the left side, where the temple is. If you look at the temple, it'll say Estonia's Fortress or Estonia Fortress. Do y'all see that on there?
Antonia?
Yeah, Antonia's. Yeah, that's it. Fortress. That is where the Praetorium would have been. So you kind of see where he went from the high priest's house to up there. That's where they brought him. Okay. But they themselves did not go into the Praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So, Praetorium is derived from the word praetor, which is Latin word for leader. So this would have been where the leader, Roman leader, if it was the emperor, it'd be the emperor's residence or emperor's court. But since the emperor's not there, it'd be the governor, and Pilate was the governor. So that would have been where he was staying. And it's just wherever he would have been staying at the time. If they were out in a field for like battle and they were all in tents, well, the Praetorium would have been at his tent. But since he's in Jerusalem, he's staying at this fortress, that's where it would have been, because that's where he's at. Okay, and
in this Bible it says Judgment Hall.
Yeah, Judgment Hall. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mine says headquarters of the Roman governor.
Yeah. All valid in what they, that's what it is. Yeah. But like I said, it's just the official residence or wherever the leader of Rome is at that time is what they would be. That's what they would have called that. And so the Roman governor of Judea or Jerusalem area would have been Pontius Pilate, and so he would have been at the fortress. So that's where it would be. And like I said, it's on the northwest corner of the temple, and that's where all the Roman area. That's where they would have been. And the Jews didn't go inside because they would defile themselves if they did, because this was Passover, and at Passover they had to have all leaven taken out of their houses. Well, if they would have went in there, the Romans, they don't live by those rules, so they would have had leavened bread and all that kind of stuff, which would have, have been Gentile area, so that would have defiled them, and therefore they could not participate in Passover if they were ceremoniously defiled. So they didn't go in. Pilate came to the gate to meet them. So they stood outside and Pilate come to them. And that's kind of how that went there. And so verse 29, Pilate then went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If he were not an evildoer, would we not have delivered him up to you?" So that was their answer. What charge? Well, if he wasn't an evildoer, we wouldn't have brought him. Okay, and so like I said, Pilate was the Roman governor over the province. He was the one that was charged with keeping Roman order. Basically, what he said went, and the only one that overruled him was the emperor. It was that type of thing. Okay, and he went out to meet them because they wouldn't go in. Which, to me, I would have been like, if you want me, you'll come get me if I was the leader. But, he went out to meet them. And then their statement to me is that, they didn't even bring up a charge against him. They just said, if he wasn't an evildoer, we wouldn't have brought him. They're just kind of beating around the bush. Maybe they thought that was going to be good enough. Because... earlier we talked about them sending 600 Roman soldiers with them to go arrest Jesus. Well, they probably already talked to Pilate about what was going on. And so he probably knew what they were going to accuse him of. And they thought, well, maybe if we just said that would be good enough. I don't know. I mean, to me, it seems like kind of a vague answer. If you want to put someone to death, you might tell them he was doing this, and this, and this, but they didn't do that. And in order for the Roman soldiers to go, Pilate had to approve that because he was the leader. The chief priest didn't have any control over Roman soldiers. It would have had to been Pilate to give that order. And so to win that approval, they had to have already told him why they wanted Jesus. So
He already knew.
Yeah, so he already knew, but yet they were still kind of vague. And when he asked them what accusation are you bringing? He's trying to hold court. He's trying to make it legal. I mean, you know, he's holding court. He wants them to formally charge him, and then, you know, have the witnesses testify or whatever. You know, he's wanting them to do all this to make it legal, and
They're not interested.
yeah, they're not interested in that. And you know, they're basically like, we got the guy, so let's get this over with. Let's just put him to death and move on. You know, that type of thing. And Pilate wasn't going to do that. Verse 31. You know, when they made that statement to him, he said, well, then Pilate said to them, you take him and judge him according to your own law. Therefore the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. That's the saying. That the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he signifying what death he was going to die. You know, Pilate's basically saying, you're not going to play by the rules, I'm not going to help you at all. You go do it according to your own law and leave me alone, basically. And, you know, they're like, you know, we can't put him to death. Under Roman law, only a Roman court could sentence someone to death. You know, the Jews couldn't do that. You know, so that's why they had to bring him to Pilate, because, you know, in order to put him to death, Pilate had to rubber stamp it and say, okay, yeah, let's put him to death. And when it said in order that it would be prophesied in what order he was going to die, there were two different types of executions in that day. The Roman way is crucifixion, nail him to a cross. Jews, their way of putting someone to death was stone them with stones. I mean, think of Stephen in Acts. They stoned him to death. Jesus had to be crucified, not being stoned. So, you know, had to go through Rome. It had to go through that. And, you know, Jesus said that he was going to be lifted up, you know, and several times he said, you know, the cross awaits me, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So he had to die in that manner, and only a Roman could give that, you know, Roman leader could give that order to have that type of execution. You know, Matthew 20:18-19 records Jesus telling his disciples in more specific terms, referring to himself as the Son of Man. He said, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify. I mean, he told his disciples that they're going to hand me over to the Gentiles. So that, I mean, he had to do this. And so when Pilate told them that, go, you know, use your own laws, then they start trying to make accusations against him. In Luke 23:2, it says, they began to accuse him, saying, we found this fellow perverting the nation, forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying he himself is Christ, the king. So they're throwing out accusations now, trying to get Pilate to follow along, you know, and so, you know, Jesus never actually, you know, up until this point, never actually said, I am king. He you know, he's called himself the Son of God. He called himself the Messiah. And, you know, when he said, before Abraham I am, so he's called himself God, but he never really said, I'm king, you know, and he didn't pervert the nation.
I don't think he would ever.
No, he wouldn't have. And, you know, he didn't pervert the nation. As a matter of fact, he even permitted them to pay taxes. If you recall in Matthew chapter 22, verses 15-21, it says, then the Pharisees went and plotted how they might entangle him in his talk, and they sent to him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, teacher, we know you are true and teach the way of God in truth, nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of men. Tell us therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money. So they showed him a denarius, and he said to them, whose image and inscription is on this? And they said to him, Caesar's. And he said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God. So he's saying, give Caesar what is his, pay the taxes, So he never said that not to pay taxes. So they were lying when they were saying this. And for them to say that he's claiming to be king, and forbidden to pay taxes, that would have been what Rome would consider seditious, and therefore punishable by death. So they knew exactly what to bring before Rome for them to want to put him to death, and that's why they said that. Verse 33. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" So Pilate went back inside, and they had Jesus brought in to him. And that's where he asked this question. So the Jews were still outside the gate, and he brought Jesus in, probably so he could talk to him in private, not with all the people around, so he could talk to Jesus in private. And he asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Now, if Pilate really thought that Jesus was the king of the Jews, he wouldn't have been so nonchalant and all that kind of stuff. If he really thought he was, he'd want to, put him to death immediately, because that's what Rome does. But he loaned that 1/10 of his legion to go arrest him, and he's probably reported back. He gave up without a fight. If you go get a king, you're probably gonna have a war on your hands. So it would have been something that's foreign to them. Like, there was no fight. He just gave up. So he was probably skeptic, or he may have been a little sarcasm when he said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He probably a little sarcasm going there, and he's like, "You're not even dressed like a king." He's wearing, the stuff that he did. And so, he's holding trial. He's trying to give Jesus a chance to defend himself, and, against the charges. And Jesus answered him in verse 34, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you concerning me?" So he's not saying yes or no. He's saying, are you doing this for yourself, or are you doing it because that's what they told you? And so, Jesus is not really defending himself right now. He just simply, asked him a question. And Jesus did it a lot. You ask him a question, he answers you in a question. Jesus was really good at that. So he's asking Pilate, are you recognizing me as a king, or are you just hearsay, And Pilate answered in verse 35, he goes, Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Pilate still hadn't figured out, what's up with this man. And, he's saying, I'm the Roman governor. I'm not some Jew. I'm only relaying to you the charges against you. That's basically what he's saying. And, I'm not saying you are a king. I'm just telling you what they're accusing you of. And, he still can't find out what he's guilty of, because he's like, what have you done? He still can't figure out why they want this man dead so much, So I think Pilate's ruled out that, this isn't a rebel leader. He's not trying to be seditious. He's not rising the people up against him, against Rome or anything like that. He's not raising arms or anything like that to do a war against Rome. So he can't figure out, what's going on here, And, he sent those, and no loss of life. He sent all those troops, no loss of life. And Jesus came forward, gave himself up, let himself be arrested. I mean, that's something so contrary to what Rome is used to. And they can't figure it out. Verse 36, Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so I should not be delivered to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world." So, Jesus is saying, I'm a king, but, he's telling Pilate, I'm a king, but my kingdom's not of this world. And when he said my servants would fight, he's not talking about the disciples. Because if his kingdom's not of this world, who are his servants? The angels in heaven. And so, he said back in Matthew 6:53 that if he would ask, God would send more than 12 legion of angels, to come protect him if he asked. And so, he's talking about the angels who would fight if my kingdom, because my kingdom's not of this world. And we talked about that one angel killed 135,000 Assyrians in one night. So think about what 12 legions of angels could have done. We talked about this last week. They could kill everyone in the world. So I mean, that's what Jesus is saying. They would fight if my kingdom were of this world, but I'm not from here. Verse 37. Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" And Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I came into the world, that I should testify of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." So Pilate, asked him again, if you're a king, and Jesus said, "You rightly say that I'm a king." Now he's finally admitting that he's a king. Not out of pride or anything like that. I mean, he's just telling truth here. And but once again, he wasn't claiming to be the king of the Jews, but he was claiming to have a kingdom elsewhere. He was a king somewhere, but not of the Jews. And so he's talking spiritually, not materially. Jesus talked about that a lot, in spiritual terms, and it just goes right over everybody's head because they think
they were looking for an earthly king.
They were looking for the earthly king, exactly. And he remains in that spiritual in a lot of his answers.
They wanted somebody to liberate him from the Romans.
Yeah. And that's exactly what they wanted. In verse 38, Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" I mean, that's the perfect question. What is truth? But he didn't really want that answer. He just, but I think he was being sarcastic. What is truth? Because as soon as he said that, it says, and when he had said that, he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no fault in him." So Pilate said, "This man's done nothing wrong." And, standing before him at this time was the very truth, his own creator, but his pride wouldn't let him see it. And that happens to many of us today. Our pride stands in the way of us coming to Jesus. Every evidence or everything that our fiber in our being knows the truth, but we can't bring it to ourselves to come to that truth because of our pride. And that's kind of how Pilate is. His pride. He was the Roman governor. He didn't need to look at Jesus or think of Jesus any other way than just some common man they brought to me, But the creator of the universe was standing right in front of him, but he still said, "I find no fault in him." So he's still declaring him innocent. But the Jews didn't like that answer. So they, in Luke 23, 5-7, when he told them, "I find no fault in him," they said, but they were more fierce, saying, "He stirs up the people, teachings throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place." And when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man was a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belongs to King Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod. So he's like, "There's my way out." He's a Galilean. Herod is ruler over Galilee, so I'll just send him to Herod. And he thought that would get him off the hook. And so, the Jews piled on more accusations, but Pilate thought he'd find a loophole. Let Herod deal with it. And so he sent him there. And if you look at that map, you'll see where Herod's temple was. They'd have to come and go, come down from where Rome was, and then go more west to the, that would be to the east. And they would go to where Herod's temple is. You should be able to see that on there.
Palace of Herod the Great.
Yeah, I guess that would be west. It would be west. Yeah, it'd be west on the west side. I'm not looking at the map, so I'm just kind of trying to think about where the map was at. Do what?
South also.
Yeah.
South of
It would have been about a 15-minute walk from Praetorium all the way to King Herod's palace. So that's where they took him.
I think it's interesting that today we're also questioning what truth is.
We are.
And I think that's something that, through the ages, it's not something that people have been able to answer, apart from God's truth, because
And
truth is, relative to what your circumstances are, typically is what people want to have relativism about the truth.
Well,
And
they
the
need
more we
something tangible.
Yeah, and the
to
more we
believe
stray
in.
from God's word, the less we know what truth really is. I mean,
True.
we don't have that plumb line. We're over here, we don't see that. So they took him to Herod, and in Luke 23 gives the account of what happens with Herod. It says, "Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him. And he hoped to see some miracles done by him." He wanted Jesus to come be a parlor trick, come do some miracles. And then he questioned him with many words, but Jesus said nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arraying him with a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for they previously had not, previously they had been at enmity with each other. So previously they kind of had that friction, and because Pilate did that, he was basically recognizing Herod had his authority, and so they become friends. But Jesus didn't answer Herod. Herod asked him a lot of questions. Jesus didn't answer him. He just kind of stood there and never said a word. And because he wasn't going to stoop to Herod's circus. He wasn't going to perform. Herod wasn't even a legitimate king of Jews, because Herod wasn't even a Jew himself. He was an Edomite that Rome placed and appointed over them as king. So he wasn't even one of the people, so to speak. But he put a robe on him, and he sent him back to Pilate. They mocked him, and the robe was kind of like it was a nice robe, kind of like what a king would wear, mocking him and sent him back. So he acknowledged Jesus to be a king in mockery, and Pilate apparently appreciated that, the mockery and stuff, and because they become friends afterwards. So Luke 23 says what Pilate did next. Then Pilate, when he had called them together, the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, "Ye have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I found no fault in this man concerning these things which you accuse him. No, and neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him." That's what Pilate's done. I found no fault in him. I sent him to Herod. Apparently Herod didn't find any fault in him worthy of death, and he sent him back. So I'm just going to chastise him, and whip him and release him. He thought maybe that would be a compromise. We'll whip him and release him, and he's getting punished, but the Jews didn't want him released. They kept crying out, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him," after that point, and so so Pilate was trying to find ways to release Jesus. So in verse 39, he says, "But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" And they all cried again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Barabbas was a robber. So, they're crying out for Barabbas to be released. And his only crime was not robbery. Okay, he was a robber, but he was also a murderer, a rebel. I mean, there was almost no redeeming qualities in Barabbas. In Mark, it says there was one, Mark 15:7 says there was one named Barabbas who was chained with his fellow rebels, and they had committed murder and rebellion. So Mark gives a little bit more detail about what he did. And we learn more about Barabbas in Matthew 27. Says, and now at the feast of the governor, it was custom to release to a multitude one prisoner whom they wished. And at that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, do you want me to release to you Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ? For he knew they had handed him over because of envy. So they knew they handed Jesus over because of envy. And while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, have nothing to do with this just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. And the governor answered and said to them, which of the two do you want me to release to you? And they said, Barabbas. And Pilate said to them, what then shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? And they said to him, let him be crucified. And the governor said, why? What evil has he done? He's still trying to ask. But they cried out more and more, saying, let him be crucified. So, he was trying everything that he could to try to get Jesus released. And they wasn't having it. And he knew they just handed Jesus over because they were jealous of him, envy of him. And, and his wife's message probably confirmed what he thought, because she said had nothing to do with this just man. She knew that he was innocent. And so it kind of confirmed with Pilate that he's an innocent man. And they were still called out for this rebel and murderer and robber and all that, and so he tried to bring Barabbas out there because he was betting that they would be forced to choose Jesus over this guy, but because he was trying to avoid this crucifying Jesus, and it didn't work. Something interesting is some manuscripts actually attribute the name of Barabbas to his full name, Jesus Barabbas. Some manuscripts call him Jesus Barabbas. And the name Barabbas literally means son of the Father. So his name literally means Jesus, son of the Father. And so they had a counterfeit Jesus, son of the Father, and the real Jesus, son of the Father, before them, and they chose the wrong one. And this is a foreshadowing of that's going to happen again in the tribulation when they choose the Antichrist over the real Christ. People didn't learn they're going to choose the wrong one again. And so the question is, who are we going to choose, the real Christ or the fake one? And my prayer is that we all choose the real one. The people made a mistake. He said, let the blood be on our heads, on our children. And AD 70, there was a great slaughter, and they were scattered, to the four winds of the earth, four corners of the earth. And just recently they've been brought back, because Ezekiel prophesied that they would. But, they have suffered greatly because they chose the wrong Jesus. And, people today suffer greatly because they choose the wrong Jesus. And I'm going to end this with back to where Jesus said he was a king. There are several ways where Jesus is a king. And this is where we'll end it. First of all, he is the King of the Jews, even though they didn't accept him. That title opens and closes the first gospel. Matthew calls him the King, King of the Jews. He's also the King of righteousness. The writer of Hebrews reminds us that he was in the, how they put it, it says he was in the order of Melchizedek. And Melchizedek was known as the king of righteousness at the time. And he's also the king of peace. Following the Melchizedek, Melchizedek was the first, or his role as the king of Salem. And Salem actually means peace. So king of peace. He's the king over all the earth. Daniel said he's going to give a kingdom, a dominion, and it will never be destroyed. He's the king of all the earth. He's the king of glory. David cries, lift up your head and the king of glory shall come in. David called him the king of glory. And then the Revelation calls him the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And when he returns, that's exactly what he's going to return as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord.
Amen.
And that's where we're going to end for today.